Boris warns Brexit talks in serious situation after VDL call EU not reasonable. Boris Johnson and Ursula von der Leyen engaged in a crunch Brexit phone call, their fourth conversation on the matter in just 2 weeks. The Prime Minister called his European counterpart at 7 p.m. this evening so they could discuss progress in the trade deal negotiations. It was not expected the call would lead to a breakthrough in talks, but statements from both sides struck a solemn tone as big differences remained, with the Prime Minister concluding, it now looked very likely that agreement would not be reached unless the EU position changed substantially. A Downing Street statement said, the Prime Minister spoke to Commission President Ursula von der Leyen this evening about the state of play in the UK-EU negotiations. The Prime Minister underlined that the negotiations were now in a serious situation. Time was very short and it now looked very likely that agreement would not be reached unless the EU position changed substantially. He said that we were making every effort to accommodate reasonable EU requests on the level playing field, but even though the gap had narrowed, some fundamental areas remained difficult. On fisheries, he stressed that the UK could not accept a situation where it was the only sovereign country in the world not to be able to control access to its own waters for an extended period and to be faced with fisheries quotas which hugely disadvantaged its own industry. The EU's position in this area was simply not reasonable, and if there was to be an agreement it needed to shift significantly. The Prime Minister repeated that little time was left. He said that, if no agreement could be reached, the UK and the EU would part as friends, with the UK trading with the EU on Australian-style terms. The leaders agreed to remain in close contact. There are just 2 weeks until the end of the EU transition period, with the two sides still far apart of key issues. Yesterday Ms von der Leyen appeared optimistic about a deal when speaking to MEPs. She said, there is a path to an agreement now, the path may be very narrow, but it is there. However, she added the issue of fishing could yet sink a deal, describing discussions on the subject as difficult. She said, we do not question the UK sovereignty on its own waters. But we ask for predictability and stability for our fishermen and our fisherwomen. And in all honesty, it sometimes feels that we will not be able to resolve this question. But we must continue to try finding a solution. It is likely fishing will be one of the areas discussed between the European Commission President and the Prime Minister on their phone call this evening. Last week the pair met face-to-face to discuss the deadlock in negotiations.